What we want to do today is we're going to do what we call an open forum. So it's really an open conversation to talk about the library. And just a little background on our team. I sort of grew up in a library planning family. My parents, Aaron and Elaine Cohen, both started the firm, Aaron Cohen Associates, and my father still works in the firm. He's reached 80 this year, and he's still working on a project which is wonderful. So I always have that opportunity to have that wisdom, to reach out to that wisdom. And I've been with the firm now 13 years, and I would say this type of planning is the type of thing that is an older person's venture. It's the type of thing where you have to try to keep things simple, transparent, open-minded, and so I was very lucky to get involved in many library projects at my age, and now just going over 13 years and doing this, there's always challenges. Each project brings its own challenge. So today we want to try to uncover those challenges. But before we get into specifically the East Norwalk Library, I wanted to just give you just a short presentation to get you warmed up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go into a carousel where we're going to try to gather data from each of the groups, and we're going to put up notes on each of the placards. In preparing for this program, I found this cartoon. I've never used it before, but I think it kind of apropos to where we're coming from. One macho way to answer why you're a librarian: to avenge the decline of literacy. So, I mean, if there's a tagline for what we're here for, there are people every day, people all the time working to avenge literacy, to make us a much more knowledgeable community, a much more knowledgeable country, to have that information at our fingertips and people that are there to support us. So I wear this pin, and as a librarian, I wear this pin that I was touring the British Library, and they had these pins, and I put this pin on. Usually they put on the American flag, but for me it's the librarian pin, because I do hold our profession true. It is a profession dedicated on supporting the growth of literacy. And then I also pulled out this quote, which I thought, again, Noam Chomsky is a pretty challenging he writes some pretty challenging political books. But just this one statement from a great writer. One of the joys of childhood was an afternoon in the library to browse and bring home a pile of books. And again, I think, I'm trying to sort of give you the foundation that, look, libraries are about knowledge, they're about books, and even our greatest writers, our greatest politicians, these people go to the library, they take materials out, they sit at home, they go to the beach, wherever they go, and access to literature is really important. And we have to respect the library as an institution, and I would say, and even having the mayor here kind of indicates the importance of this library. This library is going on its 100th year in 2017. I can't say that about every library that I work for. And we're currently working on the new Central Library of Dubai. And having just gone there, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, there wasn't anything there 10 years ago, and now they have these huge buildings and 4-lane highways and incredible architecture. They're building a Louvre out there. They've created NYU out there. So now they want what we have. They want to have a 100-year-old library. They're asking me for this type of thing. They're saying, sure, we have Olive Garden. That's easy. We've got McDonald's, but we don't have this. So today's really about respecting what we have, our history of knowledge, the fact that some of the history that I just pulled off, but I'm sure you all know most of the history, but just the fact that, you know, a group of ladies got together to really start a book club. And I can say here with my wife here, Juliet, I encouraged her to have a book club in our hometown, which is Croton-on-Hudson. Again, a very small town, New England-like town. And she has a book club. And the book club is a way for the community to get together, to share knowledge. So, you know, that's really where we're coming from when we're talking about this library. We're talking about the same types of activities of building community. And so where do we come into this planning process? The third taxing district saw an opportunity to try to understand what's the value of the library, to try to understand where investments might go, what might be the next generation library. And so what we want here is an open and honest conversation about what your community is, what's the fabric, where you see the community going in the next 5 to 10 years. And we don't always get that opportunity to talk about that. So it's a really good, I call it a celebration really. We get the opportunity to think in the future, what is life going to be like? As I mentioned, so this is an open forum, and in a couple of minutes what we'll do is we'll get you guys talking and I'll be listening. My crew will be listening. It's really about us to listen. But I wanted to give you some planning guidelines. Just the typical planning guideline that we use. This is really where we're at. We're really what we call in the program loop. We're in the data gathering loop. We're just gathering data. And we want to get to a place where we're talking about a needs assessment. So what are the needs of the library? Both its services, its operation, its physical, its people. And then we want to try to get to some conceptual options on what that library may be, and then come back and present to you where those findings are. Now you can understand that whenever we start talking about something as important as the fabric, as a library, that you're going to have challenges, positive and negative. And so as planners, we continually have to recognize that there might be criticism of the library, there might be criticism of the community, and what we want to try to do is understand what that criticism is and try to appreciate it so that we can really build on those ideas. Because usually criticism is something like, it's a confusion between, or not a confusion, it's a way of, criticism is a way of, maybe the communication's not right. And so what we try to do is just try to understand, and I want you just today to just focus on what are the best parts of the library. And we're going to have each section just focus on one area. So I want to talk about what are the best parts of the children's services. And what we're going to try to do is dream a little bit. What might be? What's that 5-year, 10-year? Where do we go? Where do we go with this library? And then we're going to get into some ideas, as I was talking about conceptually, those conceptual options of what should be, to try to get to what will be. But in the master planning process, it's really about that. What could be, what should be, to try to start to develop the roots to what will be. So you can almost look at it as an umbrella, and we're trying to just capture as much as we can about what your opinions are, what your recommendations are. Before we step forward and start to provide our recommendations, we have to understand what's important about your library, your community, how you see it growing, where you see yourselves being in the next 5 to 10 years. And then we do a little bit of programming, which is just basically puzzling. You know, it's really zoning, trying to understand how big the community room is. Is it big enough? Is it small enough? You know, is it accessible? Those kinds of things. And we try to then develop zones and understand how those zones fit together into a holistic approach. So this is where the interactivity starts. And it's a little backstory on this, funny backstory. I've been showing this picture for a number of years. Does anybody know what this picture is? your art history buffs. This is the School of Athens by Raphael. It's from the 1500s. And I started looking at this picture really with the question of, where does learning come from? And what are learning spaces? How does learning reflect to the history? Is it something new? When we talk about creating learning spaces, is it something brand new that we're talking about? Or has learning been around for many years? And so this picture is very interesting because it breaks out Plato and Aristotle and Socrates are in the painting. So we're talking about the pathways to knowledge. And I was really looking last night, just trying to understand who this person is. I thought it was Michelangelo. Some people have told me it's Michelangelo, but it's Heracles. And he's sort of the defender of knowledge, which is really interesting. So the whole idea, and then right here you have Euclid. So when it comes to gaming, you get this collaboration, or this is gaming, I'm sorry. So you can start to see in the picture the different modes of learning: the walking when you're learning, the contemplation, the collaboration. And something I want to have you talk a little bit about are the learning modes. But this just gives you an idea of all of the different Greek gods. And so Pythagoras is here, and Euclid is here. So you can almost start to see that to learn mathematics back in the 1500s, it was a collaborative process. And I think that's very important to the library that we're talking about today, because if you almost look at where we've been, over the last 50 years, we went from, or say 100 years ago when this library was founded, books were hard to come by. So maybe you had one or two books, right? But about 30 years ago, you started to have books become a commodity, $1.99. So suddenly we had plenty of books. And then with the development of the e-book and the internet, we've kind of come back to this idea of all of these different learning modes. So this is the existing picture I just pulled off of the internet of the existing library. Am I correct? Is it the existing library? And so these are some of the service areas we want to discuss. We want to talk a little bit about collaborative learning. We want to talk about the community. We want to talk about what it means to be a research center. Are there any uniqueness? Is there anything unique about what we can create at the library? I'll give you a short story. So there was a library in upstate New York, and they had every time that the people would go parachuting, they would land like close to the library. Well, if they went off course, they would end up in the library. They would end up near the library, so they would call the people to pick them up at the library. So they asked, so they tell me about your library. They started telling me about the story, and they said, well, why don't you create create a collection that focuses on skydiving? I mean, you've got the people there; they show up. So it's what's unique. I think that there's something to be talked about when. Another way to look at it is to start to develop some pledges. And one pledge is to be an economic engine. And I think that might be a stretch sometimes, but just the idea of anchoring public and private investment with the library is unique to the library, and it's a challenge. And it's something that the library board will continue to have to work with, which is to work both publicly and privately on creating services. And today, people are sensitive to taxes, so we do want that blend of public-private investment. So that's very important. But also, we want the library to be flexible and forward-thinking. And in the business world, it's all about being agile. What is that? Being agile. So being flexible and continually reinventing itself. And that's part of the discussion here today also. And then, of course, we want a rational, driven design. We want it to be functional. So our challenge, again, is to try to ground it into what are some potentials that we really can accomplish. But I want to get a little bit into the learning modes. And so when we look at learning modes, we're looking at really at the user spaces. So there's different types of user spaces. Some are wider, some are smaller. And when we start to think about the library, we can only fit so many people into the existing structure. So there is a programming, there is a rubber hits the road. So in our planning process, what we really look at is trying to break the library into sort of 5 modes of learning. One being social, and the social is really interesting because over the last, I'd say, 10, 15 years, Barnes & Noble, Starbucks, they've changed really the dynamic of what it is to be social. They've created these cafe environments. And many libraries have put in cafes. And interestingly enough, the most successful cafes that I found in libraries are from Starbucks, which is a troubling challenge to anyone who wants to be independent and wants to create an independent library. So what does Starbucks have? Well, they have a brand and they have a setup. And if you so want to have a Starbucks in your library, they're going to ask you, they're going to tell you, they're not going to ask you, they're going to tell you what they need. And there's no discussion because they know when they come into your library, they already have people who say, oh, there's a Starbucks there, I'll go there. So they already know they can bring people in, and they use that as leverage. As well as presentation. Presentation is a really important part of the library model. A place where you can have programs and presentations and events. And what's really important about the program room is it's sort of the lifeblood of the library of the 21st century. The more types of programs you have, the more types of people that can come and experience the building, experience the center. So the program space and having it be accessible is very important so that anyone can be able to go and be at the library. Reflective is quiet space. And quiet space, as we all know, is something, a challenge we all try to have. All of us want to have a place where we can, focus. And focus is really important to learning. So when you're living in an environment where you don't have space to focus, then for some people that's an impediment to learning. And learning is very important, obviously, to knowledge building. So quiet space and libraries is one thing that we have that's very unique, and if it's anything that you would say, what is a library about? You would say, well, it has quiet space. And so that's very important. Collaboration is something relatively new. Collaboration is really the interaction with the computer. And what's so interesting about that is that the way we're using computers are changing. So now we're using computers that are on our cell phones. And then the touch point is the Apple Store. It's the Genius Bar. It's also the library circulation desk. So it's the opportunity to ask somebody a question and get an answer. What's really interesting about the library circulation desk is, and I've done a number of studies on this, is actually the service desk transactions are going down. And the reason why they're going down is because it's much easier to text somebody, especially if you're embarrassed. It's very easy to text somebody and they'll give you an answer. So we have to think on a tiered level now. So say if you have a problem, say with your iPhone, you can go into the Apple Store and they will make an appointment for you to go to the Genius Bar. Or if you call up on their website, you get up on the website, you get up on a chat, and you start to chat with somebody, and that's how they do customer service. I guess why I'm talking about this is because the library has to change in the way that it interacts with people. It needs to have this kind of tiered service to really be effective. So this is how the 20th century library worked. It was a social browsing environment. And we're not in the 20th century anymore. 2015, we're in the, I don't know, is it the Starbucks generation? I don't know, but it surely changed. People are willing to stand, you can't see the picture very well, but they're willing to stand online. And actually, Starbucks wants to actually make you stand online. You know why? Any ideas why they want you to stay on the line? So you'll stop and you'll buy more. You'll stop to think and go, you know what? I don't want to get back on this line. Maybe I need to get a sandwich too. So they've really thought about behavior, and we need to think about behavior. We did two projects in Tampa last year. One for the John F. Germany Library, which is the central library, and another for the Temple Terrace Library, which is a small community library just abutted to the city of Tampa. And there's a gentleman who owns all of the McDonald's in Tampa. He decided that he wanted to create his own mall, his own sort of private mall, his own sort of private library. And so what he did was, when you walked into the mall, the first thing you saw was a bookstore. And the second thing you saw was this cafe. People hanging out. And if you went up the stairs, there were conference rooms. There were group study rooms. There were places to take an interview. There were program spaces to have an event. And I stood there and I went, oh my God, this guy has basically built a library without building a library. And so we need to be thinking of inside and outside the box. This collaboration, just having people collaborate around a computer, working, is what we call collaborative. How about this picture? I don't know how many of you can see this. So the largest group, the group that's grown the most in technology adoption are the over 65s. They're the group that's now using technology, and I would almost propose that the library is one of the places where we need to support the older folks in their adoption of technology. It's absolutely blurry how much stuff is going on, and I think that's very important. So providing group study rooms, different sort of collaboration spaces, and the idea of the touch point. You can see the touch point hasn't changed much in the last 100 years. And if you ask most librarians, they'll want to have a service desk. But it's interesting, in this service desk here, they've now put stools on the outside. Sounds like the Genius Bar again. There's the Genius Bar. So we are kind of evolving into places where we can have peer exchanges, knowledge exchanges. This is at the Seattle Public Library. We also have to think a little bit about technology and how that interacts. And as you search in the Seattle Public Library, it comes up on the board behind the circulation desk, what people are looking for on the internet. But reflective space can also be space that you could be in a crowded room and it could still be reflective. You could still be working on your own. You could also be sitting on the floor if you're in a children's space. And I think one of the things that's really important is to talk about the children's spaces. And we're really excited to hear from you. What does the children's space in this library need to be? What could it be? We did a project in Fort Collins, and their whole idea was children's first. And we had program models, so typically we want to protect children from being near the front door, because maybe they could run straight out the front door into traffic or whatever. With this library, that was the most important thing was when you walked into the library, it felt like a family destination, a place for children to be, and a very successful project. Reflective doesn't need to have a lot, but the book wall always gives you the aesthetic that you're in a library. The books on the walls typically are not as important in a reflective space. It's just to give you a feeling of knowledge. How do I create knowledge? And those presentation spaces, really important to be able to have different ways to interact and have programs. And someone had asked me about the library and programs and partners. And one way to look at it is to look at this program space as really being a 10 to 12 hour space, where at 10 a.m. you might have a class, lunchtime you might have lunch, you might have social hour, 5 p.m. you might have a technology seminar, and at 8 p.m. you might have a community meeting. I mean, think of the power of one room that could do all of those things. That's the opportunity when you start to look at the library of how we look at trying to program out the spaces. So today we want to talk a little bit about the tangible components of the site, what's with the site, talk a little bit about the parking, talk a little bit about some of the egress, if there are egress issues, talk about the roof if you would like to, tell us about it all. And we're really going to try to pull those materials together to try to develop the program. And the context is to share ideas about this library. A couple of years ago, we changed the way our research method, and we've always been based on what we call evidence-based research, which is tell us what reality is, tell us the real measurements, build it up on that. But 2 years ago, there was a lot of talk about ethnographic research, and that's really the function of what we're going to do today. So I always get excited about days like this. I get nervous the day before because what we're doing here is we really want to find out from your perspective what you think the library should be. It's not about us, and we might go back and pull all that information. So we think of ourselves as researchers, and the most important people in the room are yourselves, the people that are here that have taken the time to be here to give us input, and patiently waiting through this presentation to get to that. But the focus is, it's got to come from you. It's got to come from this community. It can't come from us. So as I mentioned earlier, it's typical to have some friction around the subject. And we've thought about it. So what I want you to try to do today is ask questions as much as answer questions. Advocate your position. Talk about some ideas that are going to achieve this vision. And talk about current reality. If your current reality matches my current reality, then we can start to define the gap. And typically reality, we all see reality typically the same way. Sure, everybody has their crazy issues or whatever, but we're looking for that commonality, what we all see. We want to focus on the most intrinsic goals here. We don't want to get caught in secondary issues. And so if there's a secondary issue, let it go. What we really want to try to do is focus on, what are the best parts of the library. Now, one of the things that I run into a lot, and I think it's important to talk about before we really proceed through the study, and that is that we're always going to have creative tension. We want creative tension, but we're also going to have some emotional tension, and we need to recognize that emotional tension and get it out of the way, and try to understand that reality takes time. Any plan that we start to develop here, any plan is going to take time. Even if we decided to build a new building, it would take us 2 to 3 years to do that. So, and when we hold a vision that differs from current reality, there's a gap. And so we want to understand, where is that gap? Let's get that vision to work together. Now, what my dad did was he tried to simplify it for his son. He said, well, the whole of the library is these little pegs. You put all these little pegs together and you get a library. So he gave me this planning diagram. And so you can almost think of it as when you're talking about the library, you can talk about the little pegs. That's okay. We don't want to lose the overall vision either. So before I really jump into it, I really want to just give you some latest pictures of what's out there. This is the new Whitney Library. Okay? They had Renzo Piano on Charlie Rose just the other night talking about this. And we were lucky enough to work with Renzo Piano on the National Library of Greece. And we learned a lot from his vision of how he sees space. What he sees space is really very good light and very flexible interior. And I'm excited to go to the Whitney to see how he's created it, but I will guarantee you that the light is important. We're also working on this new central library in Dubai, and they really want to be the best in the world. That's what they keep telling me. So they want to have places where people can sit around and look at a media wall and use the internet to converse. And I do a lot of telepresence around the world. I'm sure in your business practices you do telepresence also. In the next 5 to 10 years, will we be doing more telepresence? Yeah. Do you think people might want something like this? I think so. They would love to be able to go in and connect to NASA if they could. But this is also a reality. We did a project in St. Louis County, successful project, master plan, and this is one of their libraries. They're gaming. It's evolving. They're using the library differently. I wouldn't have designed it this way until I saw this picture, but they look pretty happy. And I know my son, who plays video games, wants this kind of thing. This is a picture of the Airbnb's office. Now, I pulled this out because, is this the office of the future, to have guitars sitting up against the wall? I mean, it's very collaborative. It's very open. Collaborative nooks. Looks like a library to me. But most importantly, if there's an emergency, there's a flood, where do people go? They go to the library for information. And you have to remember that the library is the one place that when all goes wrong, or you want to know what you can get information, you got to be able to go to some central hub. And I think for the folks in East Norwalk, this plays up. Because if there is a storm or something that happens, and Hurricane Sandy affected us in Croton, so these kinds of storms affect us. So the library becomes an important hub to find out what's going on in the community. Did you get electricity back? Those kinds of things. So just some of the services that I want you to talk a little bit about. One that pops up here, there's performance, so I talked a little bit about programming space. There's the young and old, I talked about that. There's technology, we talked a little bit about that. There's professionals. I haven't talked about professionals as much. Let me just talk quickly about professionals. There is this new terminology called the digital nomad. And what's happening is sort of an evolution of what Deloitte & Touche did, is that idea that you went from having an office to having a hosting space, just a place where you might just gather. And so now the cafes are being used as this, but these are places where people go to work. They have a job, but they go to a place where they can share information, and they have community. And the other one that's right here, there's two others. Wellness is really important, library. Wellness, what if you want to look up an illness, you want to commiserate, you want to join a group? There's opportunities with wellness. University is really interesting. There's opportunities with what we call MOOCs. So these are courses. If you want to take a course at MIT, you can take a course at MIT online. It's there. It's free. So the library can become a hub for going to university, credited or non-credited. And then the art and making is another piece that is very hot on the library track, which is 3D printers, of course, maker spaces, we put in maker spaces, collaborative craft spaces, these kinds of things. So these are just some of the services I'd love you to talk a little bit about. And then I want you to talk a little bit about the checkout system. How does it work for your library? How do you use it? And we'd love to learn how that might work or how it should work. So we'll get to the end of this, almost there. What we want to do is, in this conversation, is we really want to have this creative tension. And we want to balance it against our vision. And we really want to try to understand from each of you as much as we can about what the vision is, and try not to lower that vision. This isn't the time to lower the vision about what the future is. This is the time for us to expand the idea. Now, if that expanded idea has a gap with reality, it will flush out in the research. So let's not lower our vision today. Let's try to get a little creative tension with people and try to redefine what the East Norwalk Association Library is.